Welcome to the latest episode of the Biome podcast. We are coming to you from the Isle of Mull. We've been here for a few days now. We're having a fantastic time. You will be seeing all of that content very soon. But we wanted to record a podcast while we were here. We want to talk about the ethics around wildlife tourism and wildlife tourism in general, and specifically about eagle tourism here on the Isle of Mull.
So yeah, what we mean by wildlife tourism is that Mull attracts a lot of people to the island. So we've seen lots of photographers, lots of wildlife enthusiasts, and the wildlife tourism sector actually brings in £5 million every year to this island. So
and that's just eagles.
Yeah. So the wider scale would be a lot bigger than that. So one aspect of the wildlife tourism here is about the white-tailed seagulls and the golden eagles, which are here on this island. And one way in which tour companies attract people is through boat tours. And so people will pay to go out on a boat, and they will throw bait in the form of fish off the boat, so then people can get this swooping shot of an eagle coming in really, really close.
And so this was actually something when we were coming to Mull and we were planning this filming trip, we thought, maybe we should look into it because you get really, really good photography. You could get really exceptional filming of a kind of a set-up hunt, as it were. But then when we did a bit more thinking about it, and we actually had like an hour-long conversation in a pub about this, we thought it was, there were quite a few issues with it, and so we thought it would be quite nice to actually put this into a podcast and come to you on location.
It's weird because this is the first time we've
galleries.
actually all been in the same place doing a podcast.
Yeah,
We're always over Zoom.
Yeah, it is. It's only the second time we've actually met in real life.
I know, it's very strange. So to get the ball rolling, what happens with this kind of practice is obviously these eagles are worth to the island, I suppose, about 5 million each year. But they're quite hard to get incredibly close photos of. Not only are they soaring 50 metres, 100 metres up in the air, they're big eagles, but they're a long way away. Or when they're landed, they're on a tree, all the way over there. So unless you've got a really big lens, it's actually quite hard to see them.
I mean, even with our lenses, they have pretty decent zoom, and we got incredibly excited.
And
but it was
birds.
kind of zooming in on something that is quite far away in a tree.
Yeah, and you wouldn't see them without sort of knowing where they are if they're just perched. You can see them in the sky quite clearly, and I think they're quite distinctive just because they're so big.
Yeah.
But we were saying the ones we've seen perched in trees, we would never have seen them even driving really slowly
we
like we do. We drive so
them.
slowly with our binoculars out the window, but we would have driven past them. We've only found them because other birders were there, and we were like, "What are you looking at?" Now you know where they are, and people kind of learn, and then you can find them. But they're easy to miss.
And I guess the unique selling point here is that if you go on these boat tours, you get an almost guaranteed very close up, because the birds are, a couple 6 meters maybe away from the boat, and you get an almost guaranteed shot of eagle coming in, talons out, hitting the water.
And I think
you get the money shot.
Planet Earth would sit there for months to get that sort of shot.
And I think that's the thing, a point to make is that the eagles have associated this boat now with kind of as if it were a fishing boat. So they will see the boat, they'll be attracted to it because they know they will get a reward of fish.
And the way it works is they are mimicking a natural behaviour. So that's the kind of where the ethics become a bit blurry for me, because they're not making the eagles do something unnatural. It's not like a SeaWorld situation where they're
dancing bear.
Yeah, it's not that. They are doing a natural behaviour, but it's an interference in a natural system because it's humans feeding them something. We assume a fish that we don't even know if it's a fish species that's in the loch or in the sea around here. Like, we just assume that.
And I assume it's just a dead fish.
Just some dead fish, but it could be any fish. We don't even know.
Any fish, and as we know, there's no such thing as fish. So what? I mean, it is fairly obvious that they throw a big fish in. I think the first thing that we thought about was how many times a day do these eagles get fed, essentially for free? And you might think, oh, that's really, really good because they're still an endangered species in Britain, even though on Mull they're doing really well. So, you might think, oh, it's great that they're being fed. But actually, if they're getting fed 3 or 4 times a day, or depending on how many times the boats go out and how many times the fish are thrown, because sometimes the eagles might not go.
Yeah.
It's quite a lot, I think.
Yeah, and I think this is where, for me, I find it quite problematic, because I think if you were just looking at it at the eagle, and I think this is something we've said so many times in this season of the podcast, is if you look at something at a species level or an ecosystem level, you're going to get two different answers. So just the eagles, that's a good thing.
Well.
Yeah. So they're going to be really
fed.
healthy, they're getting fed, they're probably going to have a higher success rate with their chicks because they've got guaranteed meals for their chicks.
And I wonder, is that why? Is that part of the reason why Mull has the highest breeding density of white-tailed eagles in the UK?
I wonder
actually,
because
that's really interesting.
I don't know, as far as I'm aware, that there are other equivalent tours on Rum and Westeros and the other islands.
Yeah.
I don't know, because when we were on...
You just said Westeros. I'm sorry, I can't give a straight face when I say that.
That's what it's
Because
called.
we were actually on the other side of the loch watching this boat come in, and they threw at least 3 or 4 fish in the space when we were watching them.
I think we counted 3, but we weren't watching the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. And so if that's a fish that they're taking back each time to their chicks, that's also going to reduce the need for wild fishing behaviours, because they're like, well, I can just sit in a tree, wait for the boat to come, and I don't have to expend any energy fishing. That to me, like you're saying, it's the natural behaviour, kind of.
Yeah.
But then if they're not actually having to fish, then that's also changing.
There is something to be said for, there's quite a few studies looking at, the dietary biology of white-tailed sea eagles, and some of these studies, I mean, as ever with scientists, we all disagree, but some of these studies have, in certain populations, up to 50% of their diet is carrion. So it's like dead fish washed up, it's marine mammals, it's dead foxes. There's a great video on YouTube of an eagle coming and eating this dead fox, and lifts it up because it's massive. So, to a certain extent, well, maybe it's not impacting their hunting behaviour. But then are they not scavenging?
This is where I think the looking at the species level and the ecosystem level comes in, because I think if you look at it on an ecosystem level, it's a massive interference, because scavengers play such an important role in the ecosystem, and the eagles, and so do predators, and the eagles are doing both of that. So when you are interfering, when you feed, supplementary feed, or just directly feed a wild animal, it's gonna be scavenging less or predating less. It also means that their prey species might become more abundant, which might mean that further down the food chain, other things become less abundant. If they're eating herbivorous fish, let's say, then those herbivorous fish are going to boom, because less eagles are eating them because they're eating these dead fish. And then they're going to eat more of the plants in the loch, and then who knows what that could mean. It could mean a loss of habitat for crustaceans living there. It could mean, algal blooms. It could mean less carbon being sequestered. Like, you just don't... The possibilities are endless of where it could go. And it also means scavengers are going to have potentially, like, the impact on scavengers is potentially
there might
less,
be
like,
more,
pure
I guess.
Scavengers, yeah, there could be
there's
more.
less big eagles for scavenging, than the ravens do better.
Yeah,
but I guess it's an outweighing thing. Like, does all these possible negative impacts on the wider ecosystem outweigh the positive impacts of this wildlife tour? Because part of the reason that Mull gets 5 million from eagles is these tours.
Yeah.
And, even if not all that 5 million goes into their conservation, by establishing a reputation as Britain's #1 white-tailed eagle destination, bits of that will go back into conservation.
Yeah.
So it's weird. Perhaps it's actually quite good for the eagles, and maybe actually quite good for the species in this region. Like, locally, it's quite good for them.
I mean, I think
but is it bad for the ecosystem? Is it, how do you weigh it up?
Well, I think it's what you say, the kind of impacts on conservation. I think as well, all those people who come I think anyone who's ever been on one of those tours would not want those eagles to go extinct.
No,
they've had an incredible experience, whether it's, however you feel about it. Those people had an incredible day, an incredible interaction with a wild animal, visual interaction, and they are going to want that species to be okay. And so that's great. You're getting loads of people passionate about eagle conservation. And species-based conservation is not always the worst thing in the world.
No,
I think
absolutely.
Conservation is moving to this ecosystem approach, which I personally do think is better. But species-based conservation does work in a lot of senses. And protecting eagles means protecting eagle habitat, which means protecting everything that lives in eagle habitat. But
on one level, I think you're less likely to get people overfishing in Mull, because all these people on the boats are saying, no, you can't do that, eagles there.
Yeah.
Because I guess the point to make with that is we met a lady in the harbour in Oban, and just this kind of sparked our conversation around this, because she'd been on one of these tours, And I've never seen someone so enthusiastic about eagles in my life.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are lots of people, but she was smiling. She was describing this, how it zoomed in, how she saw the feathers, how she got this shot.
She said it was the best day of her life.
Yeah. she could not stop smiling.
Don't get me wrong, it would
huge.
probably, if I hadn't thought about this beforehand and I had gone, it'd probably be the best day of my life. Like,
Yeah.
oh my god,
Oh,
eagles.
I mean, to
That's
see them that
absolutely
close,
incredible.
even seeing
Yeah.
them from a distance, we've been in awe of them.
In awe. They are huge and they are incredibly majestic. I think another kind of thing we should say is that we don't actually know the impact that this feeding is having. It could be nothing.
I don't know anyone's done a study on it.
I don't think it's been going on long enough to necessarily know the knock-on effects for the ecosystem. So we are kind of hypothesizing here and having a more theoretical discussion of the ethics around it.
And maybe the eagles haven't been here long enough to have a positive impact that is now being reduced. Like, when did they come back? Was it?
I mean, it was 1970s.
Oh,
they were
70s.
released on rum.
On rum.
But it would have been probably several decades later because their population was slow to grow to move to Mull.
Do we even know yet if they are an active part of this ecosystem, or is the ecosystem still in pre-reintroduction?
I would say now, given that Mull has
stage.
the highest nesting density of white-tailed seagulls in
It's,
UK.
it's 16 pairs, isn't it?
Yeah.
16 pairs. Yeah, you'll know because they're the size of a
They're huge.
small aircraft almost.
You can't mistake them. There's nothing that is comparative in size on this island.
But say, like what you were saying, like that we don't actually know the impacts on the ecosystem. It just made me think that with the eagle territories, we've seen there are several different nesting pairs on different parts of the island. This boat tour is just operating in one territory with we saw 3 eagles coming down on this boat. Is that then just it's a subset of the population and they're doing really well, but the rest are just doing their thing. They're fishing in the locks, they're using the other 800 kilometres of coastline on Mull. I'm actually thinking now maybe it's more localised than we think it is. It's not impacting the white-tailed seagulls as a whole on Mull. It's whoever's on that particular lock, they're like, hell yeah, our chicks are going to do super
We
well.
hit the jackpot with this territory.
We don't know how many companies are doing this, and we
That's
also
true,
don't know. We've only seen it once, and we've been there several times, so we don't know if they do stick to the same route. Or if they go around the rest of the island. So we don't know if it is just those eagles. But other photographers we've spoken to are like, they're just waiting for the boat. And when the boat comes, they're going to go off. And so we know that they have established this relationship where they know, they're smart enough to know that this boat comes, this means food.
Birds of prey are pretty smart as it is.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
will know boat means food.
They've
And actually,
established
do you remember the other boat we saw?
Yeah.
There was a smaller boat mucking about. I think they were fishing.
We think they might have been fishing,
And it wasn't the tour boat at all. And yet there were three eagles, I think,
Yeah,
at one
there were
point.
three.
Very
circling.
close.
And they spent about 20 minutes, I think, circling.
Very close to the
Obviously
boat as
didn't get any fish.
well. No, didn't
And
see
so
them
is
diving
that
at all.
bad for the eagles now that they associate all boats, or if they associate all boats with food, so they expend all this energy flying about and then they don't get food? Or is it just 3 eagles happened to be flapping about, saw a boat and thought maybe there's a loose fish because you don't fish loose fish.
I think they definitely were thinking boat means food, just because we saw them flying very close to the water and not a single one of them tried to get a fish at any point.
Yeah.
Whereas when we saw them coming that close to the water with the tour, they were talons out in the water. We saw them catching the fish. So I think they were looking, but it didn't really seem like they were hunting.
I think
So they were scavenging.
They clearly, but they are
scavengers.
big scavengers, and also a big part of their diet is kleptoparasitism. I can never say that word. Kleptoparasitism. So they'll mob an osprey and get it to drop its fish. So if this particular pair of eagles are getting well fed, they don't need to kleptoparasitize. So the other hunters in the area might be doing really well because they're not losing half their kills to eagles.
But I guess almost a darker side to this is that if the eagles are then associating any boats with food and humans in general as being positive, that is great because most people that we've met are conservationist filmmakers. They want to protect the eagles, but I think it's important to mention that these eagles were driven to extinction as a result of persecution.
And they still are being persecuted.
And so, the threat hasn't been eliminated. So there are bad people who would clock onto that and be like, oh, okay, they will associate a boat with coming really close, and that could lead to persecution.
Were they persecuted because of competition with fishing?
I think it was a mix of they were persecuted because of a perception that they would impact farmers during lambing season. And some white-tailed seagulls are big enough to take lambs, and they're occasionally they take something of that size. I think there are records of them taking a few lambs, never enough to make a dent in any farmers' livelihoods. And they take foxes and things, but it was also about just the habitat going, and it was about the collapse of local fish stocks, and also they're big predators, and in Britain we've never really been comfortable. We're still not, are we, with big predators? So it's
when
much
you've got
easier to
beavers, you've got anglers who have a huge issue with the reintroduction of beavers and the competition with fish. I would imagine
not even
a huge predator. Exactly.
Yeah.
So with an actual predator that does take a significant number of fish, I would imagine.
But that raises another kind of interesting point about the baiting and feeding that I think you mentioned in the pub, that's kind of a more human social element of if they're feeding the fish, they're less likely to take a lamb. And I do wonder if that's sort of part of it, and maybe that's why there's maybe less opposition from locals about it, because I imagine that some of the locals don't like the idea of the eagles being fed. I don't know. But maybe actually they don't mind it so much because they're less likely than to take.
It's the balancing act, isn't it? You can have the eagles as long as they don't take the lambs. Well, how are we going to get them to not take the lambs? We're going to make sure they're not hungry enough to take the lambs.
I think
it's really difficult.
It is really difficult. We went. Well, I think we all knew. None of us wanted to do it.
Also, we've been talking about this from
back and forth of the pros and cons so long.
We've been talking about this a lot from a conservation angle, but also from a photography and filmmaking angle.
Yeah, I was about to say the same.
I kind of thought, oh, this would be really, really great if we were there and we were just getting these shots, but also you wouldn't work for it.
Yeah.
And when we saw, so we were also obviously looking for otters. When we saw that otter, and we'd spent all day thinking, we're not going to get the otter, and then it came, and it was within 5 meters of us, and I was actually so close to crying because you work for it.
Yeah.
And then you think, got it. Whereas going out on a boat and paying for it, it feels a bit weird.
This was something that I think was a big thing for me. I was coming at it from, we all had two angles, as a conservationist and as a wildlife filmmaker, and I would always describe myself first as a conservationist and secondly as a filmmaker, but the conservation argument alone was enough for me. But the filmmaker side of me was the more kind of, maybe we should do it, because it would be
same here, because the shot would be
incredible.
amazing.
But then I thought about it and I thought I wouldn't put my name on it. I wouldn't feel comfortable posting that, because I was like, you're going to see it. It's a dead fish in the water floating, and then you're going to see it. And I don't.
And people will know.
You'd have to disclose. I think we'd have to disclose.
Yeah.
Where
And also,
we
I
got
think
the shot,
with the Biome
just
project,
ruins it.
we always aim to be really open and honest, and I think this is why we wanted this discussion, because if we did go on that boat trip, we got this incredible footage, people within the conservation industry would know how we got those shots, and I would feel bad not disclosing, saying, look, we went on a boat, but then it was baited, so then.
And I wouldn't feel comfortable publicly endorsing baiting or feeding of wild animals, and so I know I wouldn't use the footage.
But then the interesting question that we were asking in the pub was, do we want it to stop? And if the answer to that is no, then why are we not going on it?
I don't know if I do want it to stop. I'm really teetering on the line, because if we had studies, if we had the evidence saying it was bad, then I obviously would. But at the moment, I don't. I want eagles to bring money to Mull. I think that's fantastic. I want eagles to bring money everywhere, so we can have more eagles. I want eagles and money to be associated, because money, unfortunately, equals conservation success. So I don't know. Even though I wouldn't do it, I don't know if I want that guaranteed. Because every time the boat goes out, that's 12 more eagle lovers, and that's a guaranteed every day. 12 more eagle lovers, 12 more. And the more eagle lovers, the less likely we are to lose them again.
And I
don't know if I would lose that.
I understand that. I do want it to stop. I want them to stop feeding the eagles. But I am looking at it in a kind of rose-tinted glasses way, where the eagles I think the eagles will still bring money to Mull without the tours, because we are here bringing money to Mull. We went out for lunch today. We are we've done our shopping.
Chase
here.
anything if it's an exotic.
But we're in an Airbnb. We've done shopping. We've been out for meals. We've participated in the local economy, and it's something that we've discussed as a three before, that we deliberately tried to do. We could easily be when we went to the beavers, we were like, right, we're going to go for lunch, then we're going to tell them that we're here for the beavers so that they know. And it's important, I think, to invest in the local economies where these especially reintroduced species are. But I think in this ideal world that I want in my mind, I do think the Eagles should be able to bring the money to Mull without these tours. And I think that we've met so many people on the side of the road who wouldn't do, and we've asked them about the tours and the photographers and the birders, and they wouldn't do it.
And the one guy we did meet said, I did it, and I felt weird about it.
He felt uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That was
he
an
didn't
interesting
like
opinion.
Yeah.
But I think we can still have this wildlife tourism surrounding the Eagles without these tours, and that's what I want to get to. And I think part of the problem is we've got this kind of, without going too deep into kind of consumerism, capitalist society, but we have got so used to having things like this.
On demand,
like, we expect next day delivery, and if we don't have next day delivery anymore, we're like, well, that's ridiculous.
What was the point anyway?
2 days, we want to skip all our ads. We are, everything in our lives is on a tap of a button away, and we've gotten so used to having things like that, and we've been spoiled by programs like Planet Earth, and people then are like, I want to see that with my own eyes, and they don't realise that those photographers are out there for months and months and months, which I'm glad they've started putting how they make the film things of them.
Yeah,
we're 6 months in.
What do you think about this? Do you think that pitching up on the boat, paying however many quid it is, getting a guaranteed eagle shot, do you think that those people are less likely to retain an interest in eagles as opposed to people who stay a week on the island, search for them, hunt for them, binos, scopes, yada yada yada, and then finally get the shot?
I think it'd be both, because you have people obviously like that lady who we met who it changed her life. Like it was best day of her life, and you will have people who maybe they're busy, they have 9-to-5 jobs, and that guarantee will be that wake-up call of I really want to do something to protect the eagles. But conversely, I also think that the people we've seen on the side of the road who they're here for several weeks, like they're looking with their binos, it's that thrill, like us, of searching for something, not knowing if you're going to get it, but if you do, it's incredible.
I think
I think that's how it should be, and I think we have to get
the journey
back.
is important. I think
we have to get back to that point, and people outside of people like us need to realise that that's how it is, and you can't just pay your way in to a wildlife interaction, because if they weren't baiting those eagles, you could go out on a boat and try and get it, but there's no guarantee. Like when you go whale watching,
maybe 3 people would get it a year.
Exactly. When you go whale watching, there's never a guarantee because you don't bait whales or dolphins, but often they see them because they know what they're doing and they've been there before and they do it every day. But you could pay, but I think we've got to get away from this mindset of I can have it now. With wildlife. Wildlife is so unpredictable, and that is so part of the fun. And I know not everyone would necessarily have the time to come for 6 days, but even just one, I mean, we saw the eagles on the first day.
We couldn't believe our luck. We turned up and we're like, oh, done, we can go now.
We've seen them every day, and we had one day in particular where we saw whitetails, goldens and otters, and we were incredibly lucky, but we were also incredibly persistent. We were out for 11 hours.
And today we were incredibly unlucky. We still saw an otter and an eagle, but with the shots we got, it wasn't our day.
And it was a 2-minute otter sighting and
but like same, it was still, we were driving really slowly, looking with binoculars. Like there's nothing else we could have done, but
except for going on the tour.
Exactly.
That's what we could have done, and we didn't. And I actually think, I think it is more valuable. And again, who am I to tell other people how they should live their lives? This is a complete opinion of mine. This is not at all, but as a caveat, this is completely just my own opinion. I think it probably is still more valuable to people to turn up, look for something, fail, and then succeed than to do it. Because you could do it in one day. You could drive to Oban, get the ferry across, do the thing, see the eagle, get the badge, come back. Whereas I think it's more valuable just for your soul. Just for your own experience, I think it's more valuable to turn up and look yourself. And I think because you see other things along the way. We didn't see particularly astonishing wildlife for what we wanted to see, but we saw great northern divers. I call them loons. We saw mergansers, we saw curlews, lapwings. We got incredible drone shot. Like, we had an amazing time. I could stay on this island forever and not see otters and eagles.
We've seen so much stuff just on the side of the road.
I think it's almost that people hype themselves up, not just with Mull, but any wildlife expedition filming thing of like, I'm going to go and we're going to see X, Y, Z. Whereas I understand not everyone can stay for months and months in one place. It's not possible. But if you go, you have a disheartening experience of, for some people that isn't enough, I think. The going, seeing nothing and leaving with like, oh, well, other people saw it, I didn't. I don't know, I think some people would be very disheartened if they didn't see it, whereas us, we could see absolutely nothing and be like, oh my goodness, having the most incredible time.
This is the thing, we are looking at this very biased, because even if we came to Mull and spent all this money getting here, and we didn't see eagles and otters, I'd still come back.
Yeah.
Like, I would return to Mull, if only out of a sense of I've got unfinished business.
I would
But,
be
you know.
very disheartened, and I've been in those situations where you've gone days and days and seen nothing, and it's annoying, it's frustrating, but it makes the moment you see it so much better. And if you keep persisting, it will happen, even if you've only got 2 days. Every day we've been out for about 10 plus hours.
Yeah.
And we've just been fun. It's so light here. It's light until about 11 p.m.
Yeah.
It's
I know.
incredible. But we've
And
had
when we saw that otter,
yeah,
because
that
you'd never
I've
seen
never
an
seen
otter.
a European otter. I've never seen an otter.
And
And
I
then
don't think
we-
any of
you
us
know,
will see one
Like,
again
not like
that
that again,
close.
no.
Like that's a once in a lifetime
I
otter encounter.
very nearly wept. Like I was sitting there, and afterwards, and because that whole day we were saying we should have seen them by now. Everyone comes to Mull and sees otters. We should have seen them by now. And that feeling of coming up from the dread of failure, I you know, you can't beat it. You know.
I think with wildlife tourism in general, like overall, wildlife tourism is massively important and hugely important to conservation.
And I think essential.
Oh,
I don't think it'll
completely.
ever succeed without it.
It gets people engaged. It brings in money. It does. It ticks a lot of the boxes that conservationists are constantly trying to do. But I do think, as with all things, you put your money where your mouth is, and you vote with your dollar, as they say. Like, you vote with your money. You don't buy from brands you don't agree with. You don't, you don't spend money on stuff that you don't agree with. And I think that was the big thing for me, was I was like, I'm not going on this boat, even though I feel like we could always justify it to ourselves. You can always justify it.
You can try so hard, and we did, didn't we? We were sitting there, we were thinking...
have such an easy justification that the reason we're doing this is for Biome, and that would be educational platform that could hopefully get more people engaged with eagles by getting the shots. But it's my money that I'm then giving to something I don't agree with, and those people on the boat won't know that we sat and had a 2-hour conversation in a pub about it. They'll just see the money and be like, oh, okay, cool, that's fine. And I don't think I'd feel comfortable with that at all.
I mean, I would be quite interested to talk to possibly someone in the company and ask them these kind of questions and say, look, do you think this is having an overall positive benefit on the eagles? Because I think if they're doing this still, yes, obviously it's a business, like there is money involved, but the eagles, surely that means a lot to them as well. I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, they want the
what
eagles
they think.
to stay, obviously.
So would either of you feel better if they threw in a live fish, for instance, and gave the fish a fighting chance? I mean, we're not really considering the fish at all here. Neither am I, but I'm thinking of in terms of the eagles' hunting instincts and not wanting to lose them on this particular pair. Would you feel better if they threw a live fish? Fractionally, I think I would, but I still not enough to sway me. I still wouldn't
not
go.
for me, because it's not the big clincher for me is more the potential ecosystem effects rather than it's the fact that it's
eagles,
not natural. So even though they're unknown, it's the fact that you're interfering in a natural system, and these systems, as we know, live in these kind of balanced equilibriums, and it could become problematic, rather than the loss of the behaviour, because they are mimicking a natural behaviour. It's an incredibly easy hunt.
They still have to clock that there's a fish there and do this.
And they expend
sweep.
energy. They have to expend energy, and this is something with kind of wildlife tourism in general, like with the shark cage diving in Cape Town, the white sharks breach, and it's kind of one of the only places in the world that they do that, and it's a behaviour they've learned, and that's how they get the seals. And some shark tour operations make them do it, but it's a fake seal. And for a shark to breach is a huge amount of energy. They can only really do it twice unsuccessfully before they it's kind of game over. Like they have, like, one unsuccessful hunt, the next one has to be successful.
Yeah.
Because they need that calorific reward of a seal. So making them do that, I really don't agree with.
So how do you feel about a complete, again, a bit like the shots, complete other direction of the ball? So in Gobi Desert in Mongolia, you've got this critically endangered, I think there are other subspecies, people go back and forth, of grizzly bear, brown bear, the Gobi bear, and there's like 35 in the entirety of Mongolia.
Yeah.
And the only way they keep these bears alive is supplementary feeding. So they put out big canisters of grain, and they don't see these bears. People don't see them. They just hope that a bear stumbles across the supplementary feeder and keeps it going. And this population is like teetering on extinction all the time. Like 30 animals is not a good population. So how do you feel about that? Because that's, I guess it's baiting. I think the difference is no one's taking photographs.
I think
That's for me. I'm fine with it.
I am
but
fine
no
with
one
it
is taking photographs.
too, because I think there's a really big difference between supplementary feeding and feeding. If fish stocks were in massive decline here and there wasn't enough food on the island to sustain the eagles, it'd be a different conversation. But that's not the case. There's plenty of food here. We've seen it.
We've seen the food.
And I even think, take all the sheep out of the equation, there's plenty of food here to sustain these eagles.
Oh yeah, I don't think the eagles are eating sheep on Mull.
No,
I think if they were, you'd see a lot more dead eagles. They
absolutely don't have to. There's rabbits here. There's so many other birds that they can take, and they can scavenge. So there's a lot of food here, and so they don't need to be supplementary fed. But supplementary feeding, I think, is fine.
So how would you feel about, say these Gobi bears, that they were supplementary feeding them, and they say put a camera trap on it to then engage people with the bears so that they can actually see them? Would you see a distinction?
I think they do. I think they camera trap them because the researchers have to know how many there are they coming to the feeders, that sort of thing. And if you're monitoring over the entirety of Mongolia, you need camera traps. So I'm totally fine with that. And I kind of think I'd still be fine if they let someone sit there and photograph.
I would be fine with that as well. I think the difference there is that they're not feeding. That's the intent. It's supplementary for one, so it's a conservation action, and there's not enough food in the ecosystem to support the bears, so they have to supplementary feed. But it's also, they're not feeding for the people, they're feeding for the bears, and the people, the kind of indirect benefit is the benefit that people get. Whereas with the eagles, they're only doing it. They're not doing it for eagle conservation. They're not doing it for the other birds to have more food because the eagles are going to eat the fish. Like there's nothing. The sole purpose of it is a commercial enterprise, and to get people seeing eagles. But I think the main purpose is it's a commercial enterprise, and the kind of secondary benefits are it gets people engaged in eagle conservation. But
although, in a non-ideal world, we talked about this with both rhinos and humpback whales, because this economist figured out that a humpback whale over its lifetime is worth $2 million because of its carbon sequestering activities. Obviously, it's horrible that in order to protect something we have to put a monetary value on it, and I completely disagree with the premise. It might be necessary at the rate we're going, and eagles on Mull have a value of 5 million. And so maybe, I think, the opposition to our argument, people might counter and say, well, we have to do this because we have to put the eagles and money together, and now they've got value, and if you take this away, the value of eagles will go down.
I think it'd be interesting to know the kind of, if someone did a study for the value of otters, because a lot of people come to Mull for otters, and there's a lot of otter research, and
nobody baits otters. How do you bait an otter?
It's one of the best places in the UK to see otters, and so no one baits the otter. So it'd be interesting to compare the figures and say, okay, without tour operations, without baiting and feeding, how much money? Because I still think the eagles bring a lot of money, because there are so many people like us here. We've seen so many.
And
we've
all the
spoken
houses
to so
on
many.
the island are B&Bs.
And also the wildlife tours. So that I guess is the alternative, that you have people who are very knowledgeable. Local experts. They know all the great places, and they will take you. And again, there's not a guarantee, but like we kind of know the trees now that the eagles sit in, and we've only been here a couple of days. So that is kind of confident. You would have a guarantee, but it wouldn't be that close shot. I don't know. I think that's more a sustainable way to go.
One last thought experiment, which literally just popped in my head right now. If you could prove that the impact of these tours only affected these particular eagles, it didn't have any measurable impact on the wider ecosystem.
So just those ones.
Just those eagles. If you could prove that, would you then feel better about it, considering the impact is limited to 2 eagles out of a healthy breeding population, and they're bringing in shed loads of cash, which is going to affect the whole species? Because actually, I think if you showed me those numbers, I might say, well, for the price of 2 fat eagles, we get 5 million and a healthy wider breeding population. Obviously we're not in the scenario, so we can't know, but I might feel like that's acceptable.
I think if someone could prove, which they never would, but if they could prove there was no knock-on impacts on the ecosystem, I'd feel a lot better about it, but I still don't think I'd do it.
Right.
Because it's still not natural to me. I still wouldn't feel comfortable using the footage, because I feel like it's a lie. And, well, not a lie, that's a bit extreme, but it is still a natural behaviour. But I still wouldn't I wouldn't post it and say, look, I had this amazing experience, because without disclosing this eagle was baited. Because you wouldn't post you know, you can get incredible wildlife shots in the zoo, but you wouldn't post that and claim that you saw it in the wild. It's almost that similar lines. I still wouldn't do it because it's not natural, but I'd feel better about it because it's not a negative thing. But I still wouldn't endorse it. And I also think it's a very slippery slope, because even if this ecosystem is fine with the basing of the eagles, feeding wild animals is
never a good idea.
Never a good idea. It's kind of just a number one. You know, there are signs to look out for unethical wildlife tourism, which is kind of what we're talking about. And number one, interaction. If you're interacting physically with the animal, any interaction that's not purely visual or audio, I guess. But if you're physically interacting with an animal, dodgy. Feeding wild animals, dodgy.
The thing in North America is a fed bear is a dead bear.
Yeah.
Because you feed them and you get the great photos, and then the next person to come along doesn't realise, and they get attacked, and then the bear has to be put down.
So for me, I think it would change my opinion.
I think
because
it would
then
as well.
I would see those particular eagles on that loch as flagship members of their species, and so yes, it might not be entirely natural, but say with the bison that are coming to Blean, they're going to be in an enclosed pen with viewing platforms, and people will be able to see them, and they are a flagship of what the incredible things that this species can do in an ecosystem. To me, if I knew that those eagles were, ambassadors of the species, this is what eagles can do and why they're so majestic, I would feel happy posting that and saying, look, this isn't a representation of what you would get if you were just looking for other eagles.
I think
this
I
is
agree with
a
you.
particular eagles on this loch, and their chicks are doing well, or something like that.
I think
it would change my opinion.
to disclose it because it's
absolutely.
absolutely.
I just think I would feel better about it happening, and I would actually say, okay, I'm happy for it to stay. I think the benefits at that point would massively outweigh the costs, but I personally still wouldn't do it because I wouldn't feel comfortable with it, and I think it's a slippery slope, and I think it would be then hard for me to say, okay, I've done that, but I don't agree with people going on the shark leaping tours or other tours where they bait wild animals. I just think you'd lose that.
You would lose a bit of credibility, wouldn't you?
Credibility.
That is true.
And I wouldn't. It's just.
And you'd have to explain every time that. Yeah, well actually,
this one study by so and so, and it would have to be multiple studies, and it's just it's too hard.
I smell a master's coming on.
Yeah,
sounds more like a PhD, I think.
And on that note, shall we
wrap up?
Shall we wrap?
So I guess, you probably realised by now how complicated this topic is. We are kind of divided even between the three of us. People we've met at the side of the road have been a bit divided. But also with big film production companies as well. There have been some which have gone out and actively posted that they've been on these boat tours, they've gotten this footage. And so, yes, they have disclosed how they got those shots. But then it's, I guess, something that within the industry people are conflicted whether to do it, and I guess it's also a time thing, it's a budget thing. Can people afford to have cameramen and women on location for months and months and months, or should they just go on the boat and say, look, we did the boat trip?
Is why I'd kind of be fine with it if you had this dedicated pair which were the flagship and the effects didn't go beyond, and say, right, those are the pair for the filmmakers and the wildlife watchers, and all the rest can live in peace.
I think I understand more why they do it, because I think, not even big production companies, they're not going to be the Attenborough scale where they can afford to have people on location for months and months and months. Some companies are going to be time constraint, budget constraint, or whatever. Even big production companies, as we know, some have done this. It does make me question.
Are we overthinking it?
But also it does make me think, where is the line between wildlife filmmaking and ethical wildlife tourism? Because I think if you have a really big platform, being able to showcase that shot, you have a strong argument to make that the benefit of that, being able to showcase that to a mass audience, outweighs the impact, and it becomes this ambassador.
But is that not the argument that the tour boat would make?
It is probably. I guess that they have 12 people on a day, or 36
and
people on a day.
And websites and.
I'd be actually curious.
Definitely.
We haven't actually watched the footage that this big film company got, so I'm curious.
And we don't know if they disclosed it.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I think it would be worth watching it and see, do they actually say, look, we're baiting these eagles, this is how we got the shot? Because if I was that film production company, I would want people to know how that was filmed, and not just think, definitely. This is incredible, this is what you will get if you go to Mull just as a tourist.
And I think if you've got enough of a platform, the educational passion, embarking a passion thing can be really, really powerful. But I still think it's not it's not right. I just don't feel comfortable with it.
I mean, to me, I see kind of a parallel here. So say if you've got people working in sanctuaries or rehabilitation and they are trained professionals and they are the ones holding the animals, they need to have animal contact, they have a massive educational role there to post on every single picture. This is not a pet, this is a trained professional. There's always a disclosure that needs to go with that, and if you don't put that, that's irresponsible. So I think in a similar way, if you do get these shots and it's baited and it's not natural, you need to say that.
You need to disclose it.
I'm not necessarily against it, but like I would like to know that it, like say eagle on a carcass, for example, if they put that carcass there, I still respect that it's an incredible shot, but I'll understand a bit more, okay, it wasn't the eagle that killed it.
And I think I just want to say, like, I am very in favour of ambassador individuals. I think ambassador individuals, particularly of, you know, endangered and critically endangered species, are hugely important. I think that's fine. I don't think those ambassador species should be wild animals that are an active part of an active ecosystem.
You'd rather
I think
see
they
them
should
in a
be,
zoo? Or in
a zoo or a
So
sanctuary.
kind of like bison, they won't be part of the wider ecosystem, they're just like in a little pocket.
I know of a project on an island called Rota, which is in the South Pacific, I think.
Sounds
near
like
the Philippines, and they have Mariana crows there, they were on Guam, and they're now, I think, extinct on Guam and now only found on Rota as far as I'm concerned. I know a friend who worked on this project and she told me a lot about it, so I hope I'm getting this right. They have an ambassador crow that's captive. I think they have 2, and they can't be released. I'm not sure why. I think they might have been expelled chicks that were found.
Okay.
I might not be right about this, and they're now captive essentially, and they take them around to schools and stuff and educate local people about the crows and, you know, everyone really about the crows and how to protect the crows because they're only now in this island and they want to get them up to a point where they can reintroduce them elsewhere. And I think that's brilliant. I think those ambassadors are really, really important.
Surely you could make the argument that those ambassadors are actually less useful for the species as a whole because they don't have any reproductive
definitely.
Whereas in this hypothetical scenario, these eagles might.
Oh no, definitely.
And they would
they're
probably
not
still have
as
some
useful.
impact.
They're not
on
as
the
useful
ecosystem.
as a kind of wild mating pair, but they can't be re-released. I think the point was, I can't remember the exact details, but there's nothing else you can do with them except you could put them in a natural sanctuary, not away from any people. But what they've decided to do is use them for active engagement. And I think that's really powerful. So I think that ambassador species are really great. I definitely am not against that. I just don't think they should be wild animals in a wild ecosystem because they are playing a critical role, especially as apex predators in this system and scavengers, big scavengers. They're playing such a critical role in this system that having them, interfering with them is the impact. I don't know.
So I'm always have a different opinion to that. I feel
think
like
I'd rather see a wild flagship.
If I wanted to see a flagship species, I want to see what are they actually doing in the ecosystem. And I know throwing a dead fish in is not natural.
It's not what they're doing in the ecosystem.
But it's still that you see the hunting behaviour, you see they're rearing chicks, they're adding to this
I think
population.
I'd rather see that than someone going around to a school with eagles in a cage.
Oh, no, definitely.
Even if they were hand-reared, non-wild at all.
I wouldn't, you can't do that with the white-tailed sea eagle, but...
No, but example-wise, I still think I'd rather see a wild flagship pair.
But I think people having the opportunity to see animals in the wild is really important. And it obviously does a lot for conservation. That's why it's important because people see them, they love them, they're more willing to then put in effort to conserve them or at least do something. And so all wild animals act as flagship species in that sense. But I don't think you should see them. What you see when they're catching a live fish is not natural. So you're not seeing them in their natural behaviours. You're seeing a mimic. You're seeing a mimic of it, and you're not seeing them actually engage in an active system. What we've seen when we've seen them soaring and landing and being mobbed by
buzzards and crows, that's fantastic.
Yeah, we've seen them interacting in their natural environment, and I think that's much more powerful. And so I don't think they are an ambassador species on the boat.
Yeah, no, that's interesting.
I might still call them that, I think. Though that particular pair, just because regardless of the impact on them, I think basically we need this study to tell us how far the impacts go. And
and also
I smell a master's.
We need to say it's not just one, it's not the same two pair. When we saw it was 3 different eagles, and we know that they're territorial and they have pairs. So another eagle is coming in. So we can't say for definite, and we haven't seen that boat in the same place every day, so we don't know that it's not going around the whole island. So
I mean, I think
in this kind of idealistic.
We need more information, and also I think like we've spoken about this for probably close to 6 hours now, including the conversation.
Yeah.
So maybe now like we just open it up to what the viewers think.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? Would you go? Have you been on a tour like this? It'd be really interesting to find out what you guys thought
definitely.
in the moment. What you thought before, in the moment, and then after.
Yeah, just what you kind of think of baiting in general and how that fits in with conservation. So that'd be really useful if you guys could let us know in the comments, because I feel like it's always this is our opinions, and even among us we've talked about it for 6 hours and don't fully agree. So.
And this has been a very eagle focused podcast because we're here on Mull and we're obsessed with eagles at the moment.
But there's other things as well. It's the sharks.
It's the idea. I think the wider conversation goes to ethical and unethical, or the ethics around wildlife tourism and in any interference in a natural system, whether it's feeding or whether it's baiting or just higher levels of disturbance, whatever it is. It's that kind of wider conversation of where do we draw the line,
and hang on, who are we to draw the line, and where are we drawing the line? Because I also think it'll be different for different species.
Definitely.
Depending on their ecology, their
conservation
status, depending on whether they have been extinct or not, reintroduced or not. I see very little issue, for example, with bird feeders and in the gardens. That's technically a very similar thing, feeding for not photographs, maybe for enjoyment, or feeding for hedgehogs, which are really endangered now, which are really quite endangered now in Britain, so we're being encouraged to put food out for hedgehogs. I probably still wouldn't say feed your garden foxes, but I know plenty of people who do, and it's not that...
I think it's just a blurred line. I think it's up to an individual basis.
And there's lots of variables to consider. There's the socio-economics and the conservation, the ecology, all of it feeds into where we draw these lines and what we think. And it's not, as we said, these are our opinions. This isn't a hard, cold, do this, don't do this. But I do think there are some obvious lines. Physical interaction with wild animals. No. Physical interaction with wild animals in captivity, also a no. I personally think feeding of especially predators, bird feeders, is a really different one. I think
we could do a whole other podcast on that.
I think the only animals you should feed in the wild are small birds, and you should only feed them nuts and seeds. That's my only, and that's, again, it's annoying to have that caveat.
Hedgehogs?
Supplementary feeding is fine. Supplementary feeding I would class as completely different to feeding.
But what about if you supplementary fed hedgehogs and sat there and photographed them? And got other
I think
people
that's fine, you
money
just
to sit
dispose
in your
it.
garden. Yeah, okay. I agree with you. I think it's fine to feed birds and hedgehogs.
Last point being slightly devil's advocate, but with the boat that's going out, could we not argue that is supplementary feeding, because that isn't the entirety of their diet, so it's just adding a little bit to what they already have, because they won't exclusively eat that, they will eat other things.
I think you can only call supplementary feeding if it's
if
there's
otherwise
not
they wouldn't
enough
survive
food in the ecosystem.
And
so
clearly they do, because eagles all over Mull, have we
there's
seen.
Loads of them, and there's loads. We've seen so much of their prey. So I think what I would define as supplementary feeding as a conservation tool is when there's not enough food to support the population.
So like with the bears.
Okay. If you don't supplementary feed these bears, they're gone. In under a decade.
Whereas I don't think the eagles would decline if these tours stopped. No. They might have to work a bit harder, and it might be a bit of a shock to the system. I don't think the eagles would
be quite funny, actually.
Yeah, they might get a bit thinner.
They do look very lazy, these eagles. This is the thing, they're intelligent, and if they don't have to work for it, I don't think they will work for it.
But I also wonder generationally if they're now teaching their chicks, instead of teaching them, I don't know really how eagles, I don't know if it's purely instinct or if there is much parental care in terms of teaching, but
it'd be quite a bit. The chicks will circle and watch mum and dad.
Yeah, I wonder if they're learning less about how to hunt and more about how to identify the boat.
That'd be another super interesting study again, like a really long term.
Well, there you go. We've got 3 studies apiece here, and on that note, maybe we should end. It's really interesting. We've all got our own opinions, and I think we broadly correlate. But
we all came to the same conclusion in the end that we're not.
None of us went on it. But I don't think we're qualified to give a definitive answer on the wider topic. Yes, what does everyone else think on the podcast? All our listeners into the microphone. All the listeners, are you in there?
So to close off, we will hopefully be seeing you again soon. You'll be seeing all of our content from the Isle of Mull. I know we've talked so much about our different
We'll be seeing
sightings
our
that we've had.
otters.
So we'll be seeing our otters, you'll be seeing our eagles. We've seen golden eagles as well. We had an incredible sighting of the golden eagles. So yeah, really excited.
Yeah.
So if you want to find all that, you can go to www.biome-project.co.uk. We are the Biome Project with
On Instagram.
underscores on
Yes.
Instagram.
Yeah.
The Biome Project on YouTube. And if you want to find our Instagrams where we've already been posting about the Isle of Mull, I am conservation_Kate. You are Robi Watkinson Wildlife and
Yes.
Emma Hodson Wildlife. So we will end it there and go back to our wonderful trip.
See you next
See
time.
you.